The Dark Knight released in 2008 to tremendous success, soon becoming the highest grossing movie of that year. While the film made waves at the box office, many were left wondering, where was the usual tie-in video game to profit from its enormous success? The rumours surrounding such a game were in no short supply, with even a star of the movie commenting on its apparent existence. Years on, we revisit this project to learn more about its history. 2005 saw the launch of Batman Begins, The Dark Knight's predecessor, in cinemas. Alongside it was a video game adaptation developed by Eurocom and published by Electronic Arts. The game is notable for featuring voice work from almost the entire main cast of the film, including Christian Bale's Batman and Michael Caine as Alfred. Upon release, it received lukewarm reviews and performed slightly below expectations in sales. This didn't stop private equity company Elevation Partners, however. As soon as a sequel movie was greenlit, early arrangements were already being made for them to have a hand in a video game tie-in built around it. It was their company, Pandemic Studios, known for games like Star Wars Battlefront and Destroy All Humans, who they chose to produce the title. Publishing duties meanwhile were picked up again by Electronic Arts. Later, Pandemic's management would assign its original offices in Brisbane, Australia, with the task of developing it. By around September 2006, Pandemic Brisbane was anticipating the start of preliminary development. In October, the staff split into two smaller teams in preparation for their next projects, having just finished Destroy All Humans 2. One group was dubbed Alpha, the other Bravo. While Alpha worked on a pitch for an open-world racer on the Wii, Bravo would make Pandemic's new Batman game, codenamed Project B. But there was one unavoidable roadblock holding them back. The developers were waiting on the first details and concepts of the movie from which they could work. They still had not yet arrived. Pandemic, nevertheless, decided they would waste little time and begin regardless. Soon, they were assembling the first pieces of the title which would eventually take shape as the Dark Knight video game. It started life as a series of small tests and prototypes built to run on PS2 hardware, as opposed to Xbox 360 and PS3, the platforms they would actually release on. This was because it was so early at this point that the company had yet to select the engine to be used on the new systems. The first prototype portrayed simply a Gotham City back alley. It was an exercise in capturing the visual design and tone of the movies. There was also a number of animations made to test the physics involved in Batman's gliding. So early into the film's life were these made that some ex-members of the team later claimed to me that secretly their tests were informing the pre-production of the movie. Not long after the team learned of the film's title, The Dark Knight, the studio was paid a visit by a VIP. Pandemic had originally been an independent developer until November 2005, before Elevation Partners made a $300 million investment into it and BioWare. The intention was to forge a partnership between the two, allowing them to pool their resources. Elevation Partners had one of their co-founders visit Pandemic to see the Dark Knight game in its earliest forms. This individual was none other than singer-songwriter Bono. Bono was, at the time, on tour with his band U2, who were playing in Brisbane on November 7th, 2006. He had decided to stop by and take a look at Pandemic's work as a fan of the IP in question. Despite how basic the showing was, Bono was apparently incredibly excited and enthusiastic about his company's future working on Batman. As the months went by, Pandemic developed more of an understanding of the movie through their correspondence with Warner Brothers. A former artist of the company recounted one particularly memorable instance of this from pre-production. During one morning, an inexplicable series of loud screams were heard coming from the office of a senior member of staff. Curious, employees soon poured into the room to see what had happened. The first image of the new Joker had just arrived from the film's distributor, and it was being met by shock, awe, and a tinge of skepticism. Shortly after this incident, the direction of the project began to change. Previously, the team had been making assets for a more linear game in the vein of EA's other Nolan Batman adaptation, Batman Begins. These were environments rich with detail featuring moody lighting closely mimicking that of the last movie. The management of Pandemic's Brisbane branch got ambitious. They decided that the developers would take these existing assets and build an open-world Gotham City. It was thought that this approach would better suit the Christopher Nolan interpretation of the property. They were also apparently tantalized by the promises of a new engine in development that would support such a game with ease. Pandemic's other offices in Los Angeles had begun to build a new engine for their next project, another open-world game, The Saboteur. Internally, they had called the engine Odin after the mythological Norse god. Odin was intended to allow for a vast open world without compromising on detail. To the heads of Pandemic's Australian studio, this seemed to be the key to an open-world Batman game. Towards the end of 2007, after months of working on environments and tests, they would begin to transfer assets into the Odin engine. By this time, the project had been officially titled Batman: The Dark Knight. Former staff can clearly recall the fateful day when it became very apparent that the Dark Knight was in serious trouble. A model of Batman was finally imported into the game engine with unforeseen results. Any attempt to move him around in the world ground the build to a halt, decimating the frame rate to a mere 5 per second. In addition, if any other characters such as generic NPCs were introduced, it got even worse, and in most cases, crashed development kits completely. Staff were dumbfounded. The promise of Odin had been exaggerated, and what Pandemic Oz had spent around a year working on was broken. The release of the game was originally scheduled to meet the premiere of the movie, but meeting that date now seemed an impossible task. At this juncture, a small handful of developers realised the extent of the damage and promptly left to work elsewhere. For those remaining, it was now their job to see what could be salvaged. It's possible that Elevation Partners also wanted to avoid the risk involved with the troubled and costly Batman game, because not long after this, they sold the company along with BioWare to Electronic Arts. EA's acquisition included the rights to the Batman game. Instead of aiming for a July 2008 launch, it was pushed back to a target of December. This was when the Dark Knight film would be released on DVD and Blu-ray. December was Pandemic's absolute last chance to deliver the game regardless of that, because EA's access to the rights would expire around the same time. Months went by and the team did their best to work around the technical defects that plagued the game. With many of the previous ones discarded, an abundance of fresh environments and other assets were ready to be used, but the efforts of the artists behind them would be in vain if these problems could not be resolved. There were times developers admitted that it started to take shape as something resembling a playable experience, though these were soon countered by more setbacks. Missions, the few of them that were laid out, were rife with bugs, and the slowdown was still very much apparent. According to a source that spoke with Kotaku Australia in 2008, the tech issues were aggravated by the introduction of a complex HDR lighting system. The consequences of this, apparently, were that every time tweaks were made to the environments, the information informing the lighting had to be manually reprogrammed, a potentially time-consuming task. Several months into 2008, Electronic Arts curiously had yet to announce the game's existence to the public, as it was still not yet in any kind of presentable state. The two companies knew the risk of cancellation that the project was facing, with deadlines looming and a lot left to overcome. Then, in July, the cat was finally let out of the bag by someone none of them saw coming: actor Gary Oldman. Oldman played Lieutenant Jim Gordon in the movie and had signed on to reprise his role in the video game. At some stage, he had been granted access to a sneak peek and a work-in-progress demonstration of the game. This apparently featured Batman gliding over the night skies of an open-world Gotham, as well as a look at Jim Gordon standing by the bat signal, acting as a dispatcher. During a press tour to promote the film, which was releasing that month, the actor spoke with G4 TV for their Dark Dark Knight special. When asked if there was going to be a video game, he inexplicably outed his involvement and spoke openly about it. Little did he realise that he had just let slip a closely guarded secret of the publishers. The non-disclosure previously had allowed them an element of leeway from a PR perspective, but now the pressure was on for them to see it finished. Towards the end, EA poured more resources into Pandemic Oz, increasing their workforce on Batman to well over 100 people. Ultimately, the amount of staff or their ability wasn't the issue. There simply wasn't enough time to iron out the kinks sufficiently and have something even remotely worth presenting to the public within the allotted time. In around October 2008, the project was cancelled before it was ever officially announced. Odin, their engine of choice, had proven a far from ideal platform to support their creation. The managerial decision to use it was fatal. Some aspects of the game, apparently, were quite a bit further along than others. Driving mechanics for both the Tumbler and Batpod had been built in and would have been used for traversal. The developers had made a system that could dynamically generate NPCs, and missions, albeit slowly, were starting to come together. By all accounts, it would have followed the story of the movie fairly closely, featuring for example a recreation of the opening bank heist sequence. This sprawling stealth action game that Pandemic had attempted to construct had no shortage of ambition or talent on the ground floor. A string of unfortunate management decisions out of the team's control left them pressed for time as they struggled to undo the damage. In spite of their best efforts, many progression glitches and graphical errors remained. Consequently, the fixed deadline of December proved far too restrictive. To EA, this became more than apparent as they shut it down nearly 3 months ahead of the contract expiring. The cancellation of Batman the Dark Knight was a costly one, to say the least. Aside from what was spent maintaining its development over 2 years with an increasingly large team, there was also the loss of potential revenue. According to analysts, the absence of a video game adaptation around the movie's release may have cost an estimate of just over $100 million. The timing of this failure amidst the global financial crisis couldn't have been worse. Something had to give, and it did. Over the holiday period of 2008, on Christmas Day to be exact, the news everyone had been dreading arrived. Pandemic Studio Australia was being closed by Electronic Arts. EA did offer them the opportunity to relocate to Los Angeles to work on the Saboteur, a proposal some accepted. For others, this spelled the end of a tumultuous affair with a once major development house. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe. You can check out more unreleased games by hitting one of the annotations. You can take a look at a cancelled Marvel Avengers video game, or you can come over to my channel to discover many other lost games. There's plenty to choose from, like Rayman 4, a dark, adult version of Nintendo's Kid Icarus, and a scrapped Sony IP. You can visit Unseen64 at Unseen64.net. The site is an archive for cancelled, unreleased, and beta games. I hope this video has been of interest, and have fun.